Hi, my name is Abrah Arneson, and I'm a clinical herbal therapist in practice in Ottawa and the beautiful Gatineau Hills of Quebec. I I've been practicing herbal medicine for almost 20 years now. And through my practice of herbal medicine, obviously my understanding of herbal medicine has evolved over time. And one of the things that has really evolved for me is my understanding of the relationship between plants, the microbiome, and the human being or the rest of life. And I I think about this a lot. I have a passion for this topic, the microbiome and plants, and I think that there's a lot of different ways that we could be thinking about that relationship. As opposed to an adversarial relationship to a mutually supportive relationship. And so this talk about the microbiome is going to try to, offer some inspiration for changing how we think about bacteria and viruses and fungi and what that relationship is with the body, our bodies and our minds, and the microbiome. And a lot of this work, these understandings and working with plants and the microbiome has come to me through working with individuals who have struggled with chronic infections like Lyme disease. And one of the things I have learned in doing supporting folks struggling with conditions of chronic infection, which is what I prefer to name these conditions as chronic infection, um, is that the relationship between the body and the microbiome is the imbalance, or the microbiome is unbalanced and needs to be rebalanced, as opposed to killing specific bacteria. So, not that there isn't a place for antibiotics. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that plant medicine kind of has a different lens. We can look at plant medicine with through a different lens in its relationship with the microbiome. And also, just in terms of holistic medicine does look at relationships between bacteria, human cells, our mental health, our relationship with the environment, the biome of the house we're living in, or the biome of our partners, the biome of the neighborhood we're living in, because they are intersecting, and it's all related. And the plants are like mediators there. So, ready? We're gonna have fun with this talk. So let's get started. So there's so many interesting things about microbes that I I could have like made this video like 5 hours long, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to keep it short. We're going to keep it concise, and we're just seeding ideas and different ways of thinking with this video. So the biome of our planet, there's a planetary biome, and no one knows how life started on this planet, but it certainly started with microorganisms. And where those microorganisms came from or how they came into being, no one knows. All around the world, there's ideas that our planet was seeded by life from outer space. So, and there's myths of this all over the world, and this is one of my favorite one, Artemisia of Ephesus. And they say she fell from the sky and seeded life, and that Artemisia of Ephesus, her origin story is in what we now call Turkey. So this idea of a woman or life falling through the sky and seeding life is an ancient story. And one does have to wonder how 80 million viruses falling through space and coming into contact with our planet influences life. So, bacteria and viruses love to move around. We all know that when COVID hit, we were all supposed to stay inside and stay still so that the virus wouldn't move around so much. So, bacteria and viruses fall out of the air with rain and they're deposited into our soil and waters. And if you're out in the rain, singing in the rain, or dancing in the rain, you too are being impacted by the viruses and bacteria falling through the sky. Dust storms in Sierra have been known to carry bacteria and viruses across oceans like the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean. The ocean, of course, is a place that moves all sorts of different types of living beings, including viruses and bacteria. And I remember a few years ago, I was going south to Mexico for a couple of weeks in the winter. And right before I left, and one of the reasons I go to Mexico is to bathe in the ocean. I always just find that so um, fills me up in a way that nothing else does, just to bathe in the ocean, just to be in the ocean. In any case, right before I go, what do? I look at some slides in a microscope of ocean water, and I was like, whoa, look at all that stuff living in there. So the ocean is a great transmitter of the microbiome of the planet. The wind carries microbes about as well. And this is not sure why I put this picture in, but I was thinking, oh, this is really interesting. And a life originated in the ocean, so I'm not sure. It's an interesting picture, though. So when we're talking about the microbiome, what are we talking about? We're talking about viruses. Viruses are crazy, weird microbes. They're not considered alive, although I do think the human definition of what is alive and what is not alive kind of needs to be revisited in this day and age. But the reason why viruses are not considered living beings is because they need uh, other maybe animal body DNA, maybe plant DNA, maybe a fungi DNA to replicate. They take other living beings' DNA and use it to replicate. The replication of viruses is fascinating, and what's happening with viruses, I definitely think is worth looking at. So, viruses, they're one component of the microbiome. Phags, they're a type of virus. There's a lot of viruses, phag viruses in the lumens of our body. So that would be the respiratory tract, the digestive tract, the urinary tract, and the reproductive organs of a woman, in particular the vagina. So phags or bacteriophages are viruses that infect bacteria, and it's estimated that there are trillions and trillions of infections per second of bacteria of phags into bacteria, killing bacteria. And that these phags, these bacteriophages, these viruses infect approximately half the world's bacteria every 24 hours. So the scale of this activity is beyond comprehension. But I think one of the things I really take away with this idea that these viruses destroy like half the world's bacteria every 48 hours, which is, it boggles my mind to even think about, is considering the replication, how quickly bacteria and viruses replicate. Like just not even in a blink of an eye. They're faster than a blink of an eye. Like they replicate so quickly. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind when thinking about our microbiome is that replication and the management of that replication. Because clearly bacteriophages are part of the ecosystem's management system of very quickly replicating bacteria. So there's all these different kind of management systems within the microbiome: supportive, adversarial, excuse me, and yeah. So bacteria, there's all sorts of different types of bacteria. Sometimes you'll hear a bacteria called pathogenic. Usually a bacteria is pathogenic when it's in the wrong place in the body. So, for example, Candida is a commensal fungi, not a bacteria, but a commensal bacteria, a fungi in the gut. But when it migrates to other parts of the body, it becomes a problem. You'll see that with, yeah, there's it. We're going to talk about this in leak when we discuss leaky gut and bacteria. But bacteria moves around, but bacteria also has its specialty. It has an environment it likes. Bacteria lives in specific environments, and that's a really important thing to understand about bacteria. Is yes, it moves around, and yes, it develops relationship with viruses and other bacteria and fungi, but it does have certain um, environmental needs where it lives. And that is key to remember. And pathogenic bacteria is usually trying to live in an area that is somewhat foreign to it and therefore causes a disturbance. Doesn't know the rules of the game, one could say. And then we have these arcanae, and these guys are really old, and they carry the DNA that is found in the mitochondria in our cells. And we're going to talk more about mitochondria. And they're really old. They're kind of like they thought for a long time that they were bacteria, but now they've given a completely different classification in the tree of life. And these guys are quite interesting as well, especially since it's their DNA we have in our mitochondria. And then there's fungi. We're covered in fungus too. So no one knows what a healthy microbiome looks like. We have no idea. Um, in this talk, we're going to talk about places where 20 years ago they thought there was no bacteria living in the body. So we're going to talk about the uterus, the stomach, and the brain that were all considered sterile environments, and otherwise there were no microbes living there, and that is simply not true. Um, the human microbiome is completely influenced by the environment the human being has lived in, the food the human being eats, the water the human being drinks, how much sleep the human being has, um, if they're living with animals or they're living with other human beings, if they're interacting with the dirt outside, if they're interacting with plants. The human microbiome is very fluid and moves and changes depending on the environment one's in. Um, just not really a microbiome, but a virus. Is I had gone swimming once. I was living in this place, and I'd gone swimming and came home, and a couple of weeks later, a wart grew under my big toe, and for about 5 years, I developed this kind of weird relationship with this wart. I would put like celandine or dandelion latex on the wart, and it would almost go away, and then I'd stop the treatment, and then it would grow back, and I'd watch it grow back, and I was kind of fascinated by that virus. And then I moved across Canada, And within a week, the wart was gone. It just did not like to live in the new environment I had moved to. And it was extraordinary. So, where we live has a profound impact on our microbiome. Yeah, so one of the things is they say it's the latest organ to be discovered, but they also say that about fascia, and so I just like, oh, this is an ancient intelligence that we're waking up to. Um, so far they've identified 2,000 bacteria in our gut, which is a very small amount. The other day I was driving and I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about how these scientists had collected thousands and thousands of samples of human poo, and they were testing the bacteria in this all these different samples of poo, and every sample had a different kind of bacterial balance going on, and they're trying to classify what the microbiome of the colon looks like. And there was just so much information that they had to create a video game of it so that gamers could start classifying all the different types of bacteria that is occurring in human poo. And so poo is basically bacteria, essentially. So yeah, we have no idea, absolutely no idea. And again, the biome is made up of bacteria, viruses, acini, yeast, and fungi. Okay, the landscape of our body, or the ecosystem of our body, it begins at the breast. Um, and our gut microbiome is basically built with uh, uh, breast milk. Our entire biome is essentially seeded with vaginal secretions when we pass through the vagina at birth, and also breast milk, and also the woman's body when she's breastfeeding. So the areola is a high bacterial area, and that bacteria colonizes the child. But also, if you look at the armpit, is right near where the child's head is, and that's a highly rich area of our microbiome, our human microbiome. And so again, that bacteria on the skin moves over the infant. um, it's a really, really interesting study, breast milk and the microbiome. And just one thing, I'm going to talk about the difference between babies who are breastfed and the health of babies who are fed formula. But I don't want to uh, suggest that women who use formula for whatever reason are at fault for this, because it's a motherhood and breastfeeding, and the time after pregnancy with the newborn is a complicated time in a woman's life. And so best case scenario, an infant is breastfed. A best case scenario, an infant is breastfed by several women, and that will enrich their microbiome. The more women that breastfeed a single infant, is the richer the microbiome of the child. So inside breast milk are these sugars called human milk oligosaccharides. So they're complex sugars. And the thing is, it's the third biggest component of breast milk, which has, I think it's like 200 different components. And this is the third biggest component. And the baby, the infant's gut cannot digest these sugars. So, what are they doing in the breast milk? Like, why is the woman's body putting so much effort into making these complex sugars? Well, they feed a very particular set of bacteria, and one bacteria in particularly has been identified and researched. So, again, it's like there's this bacteria, but there might be 100 other ones that haven't been named and haven't been researched, or have been named and kind of ignored. We don't know. So this one bacteria is called B. infantis, hard to say, infantis, and it gobbles up HMOs. It loves these sugars. It just consumes them. And what this bacteria does is it consumes these sugars in the breast milk, breaks them down, and then feeds them to the gut cells and actually builds the infant's gut, the newborn's gut. It's this bacteria supports the development of gap junctions between the cells of the gut. So this bacteria basically seals the infant's gut. So remember, I was saying how bacteria or microbes like to live in a specific environment. This bacteria is saying, this is my environment. I'm putting up a fence. I don't want those bacteria from over there in the colon to wander into this area. Boom. Um, this bacteria is actually one of the primary trainers of the immune system. Bacteria basically, our biome essentially trains our immune system to recognize self and other, and that includes DNA sequences from bacteria, viruses, fungi, yeast. That's basically what this bacteria, B. infantis, does. It trains the newborn's immune system. And there's a study showing that a woman who has HIV and breastfeeds, and the HIV travels through the breast milk into the infant, they actually don't develop HIV because of the power of the bacteria and viruses that are coming in through the breast milk, or from the surrounding area of her body, as well as the feeding of these commensal bacteria that we need to build our gut lining, and kills them. It doesn't, the infant isn't infected. And HIV is not the only virus that infants do not suffer from. It's quite a beautiful, supportive way for the future health of our entire being is plays out from those early days of being fed on breast milk. Another thing, one more thing that B. infantatis does is it creates this chemical called ciliatic acid, and that acid basically builds our brains. So the whole gut brain connection again, where when these bacteria are really healthy and strong, infants tend to learn quicker, grow bigger brains, and have better long-term cognitive habits. So breast milk builds our microbiome. So some of the conditions, oh, right. I just wanted to talk briefly about fennel. So these are called galactagogues. It's a galactagog. Galactagog is a plant that increases a woman's breast milk, and fennel is one of them. It's also really good if there's a little bit of colic in the infant's tummy. So, or gas, it helps pass gas. So there's a a crazy story of some women who really wanted to have the best breast milk for their children, their newborns. So they started drinking like something like 8 to 10 cups of really strong fennel tea every day, thinking that this would make their breast milk just the best ever for their babies. And the babies started having convulsions, and they were rushed to the hospital, and then they found out, oh, the fennel was, so fennel is high in volatile oils, or terpenes sometimes they're called, and these constituents cross the blood-brain barrier, and anyways, they were essentially poisoning their babies with fennel. So when we're talking about plants for enhancing breast milk or calming infant's tummy if there's colic, go lightly, and then when you have the results you're looking for, like, leave it there. More is not always best in herbal medicine. Herbal medicine is so nuanced and so loving, and it really embraces life. Herbal medicine, you don't need a lot of it always to have a good result. So more is not always better with herbal medicine. Okay, let's see. Okay, so our next slide is, so some conditions associated with uh, infants that are only fed formula. And again, this is just how it is. There's no judgment on a woman's in her choice. So SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, uh, it's something like 3/4 of those infants are fed formula. Increase in respiratory tract infections, so that would be also an increase in asthma, increase in gastrointestinal infections. So IBS would be a big piece there. Um, Type 2 diabetes later in life, cognitive challenges later in life, eczema. It, you know, if someone comes in and they have eczema or some kind of skin rash, always ask, were you breastfed? And most of the time you're going to hear, no, I was fed formula. And they simply don't have the microbiome in the gut that they need, and it's coming out the skin. And so a lot of folks like that, there's a lot of work on building the microbiome and repairing the gut lining because of that. And when we start looking at the herbs to do that, you'll see they're all classic herbs that are used classically for eczema. Allergies, another one. Children who have a lot of allergies tend to not been breastfed. And anyways, the list goes on and on. So chaste tree is one of my favorite plants for breast milk. I I use chaste tree. Usually I get women to begin in their last month of pregnancy, so about a month before their due date. And just again, a low dose works. And this, I find chaste tree is really great for both easing a woman through the postpartum period. So if a woman's had depression following birthing, chaste tree really kind of smooths that transition out. um, and it enhances production of breast milk, so um, which is great. And it's also high in terpenes or volatile oils, which again is calming and soothing to an infant's gut. So I strongly recommend, if you want to know more about breast milk and the microbiome, I strongly recommend you read this book. This book is not just about breast milk and the microbiome. It's basically about the planetary microbiome, and it's absolutely fascinating. And Ed Young is a great reader too, or a great writer. So I strongly recommend this book. So let's look at our ancestors. Guys, the microbes are our ancestors. Again, no one knows how life formed on this planet. But we are complex cellular organisms. We have many different cells, many different types of cells. They all kind of come out of the same cell groups, but we're complex cellular organisms, as are deer, as are mushrooms, as are trees. So it's like kind of across the lot of life on this planet has more than one cell. And then a lot of life only has one cell. And this would be bacteria and the arachnae. And for a long time, it was the arachnae were considered to be bacteria until they discovered that the arachnae actually carries the same DNA as our mitochondria. So, mitochondria are a cellular organelle. So, these are organs inside our cells. And an organelle, the mitochondria, is produces all the energy for our cells. Therefore, it produces all the energy for our body. Therefore, it produces all the energy for our life. The mitochondria are essential for a good life, healthy mitochondria. And healthy mitochondria are a bacterial ancestor or the ancestor of a bacterial intelligence. So I include mitochondria as part of the human biome because its ancestors, bacterial and acanae. So Loki's castle is this wonderful place deep in the North Atlantic, and it's the place where a bacteria met an arachne, and they merged. They kind of needed each other. The oceans were changing, the chemistry in the oceans were changing, and they really needed each other to help each other. And the arachne lives on oxygen. The bacteria were living on other gases, but the arachne were living on oxygen, and the ocean was becoming oxygenated. So the bacteria was having a hard time surviving. So they merged with an arachne, and the bacteria offered, with their double membrane, uh, extra protection for the arachne, and the arachne offered the bacteria energy by burning oxygen. And this marrying of the two is called mitochondria, and it is present in every multicell organism on this planet. There is no organism, multicellular organism on this planet that does not have mitochondria. And I consider, again, mitochondria part of our planetary microbiome. I don't know if I've done a video on mitochondria. I might one day, so watch for it. So free radicals are produced by mitochondria actions of creating energy. Mitochondria uses oxygen molecules, which are associated with fire. So think of those oxygen tanks with the Wemyss symbol of the flame. And it burns oxygen no, it doesn't burn. It cooks with oxygen. It cooks the sugars, it cooks the proteins with oxygen so that our bodies have energy, fuel to do everything we do. That's from thinking to sleeping to eating to walking to repairing tissues to, overcoming viral infections. Everything our body does is because oxygen is burned by mitochondria. And so oxygen is extremely flammable. And you want to think about it like in this burning, these little sparks, these extra oxygen molecules kind of shoot off like sparks. And a loose fire is dangerous. So plants make these constituents called flavonoids, and they're often called antioxidants or reductase oxygen inhibitors. And they grab onto these loose oxygen molecules so that they cannot burn holes in cell membranes or in mitochondrial membranes. And so flavonoids have this profound ability to protect our microbiome, to protect our mitochondria, and to protect other good quality, good bacteria that we need for our health and well-being. So flavonoids. And some of the plants that I particularly really love to use to protect mitochondria. Oh, first we have to do the harmful. What happens if the mitochondria is not well? Type 2 diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, mental health disorders, aging. I recently began working with a woman who's 80, really healthy overall, on no medication whatsoever, eats a good diet, really involved in her community, does all sorts of, yeah, she's just a very dynamic 80-year-old. And she was just feeling sluggish, And I took a look at her and I thought, yeah, you look a little gray. And I thought, okay, well, I don't want to start like thinking I need to do something really complex for someone who's essentially healthy, but they're 80. So I just gave her Shazandra, which is very high in flavonoids. And personally, I think it's the best plant for tending to the mitochondria. And so I ran into her the other day, and she has kind of like pink in her cheeks now. Her skin definitely looks brighter, and she says it's so interesting. It's like such a gentle lift, this medicine that you've given me. And I'm like, yeah, that's your mitochondria having more power to create more energy for your overall well-being. So yeah, just a few things that harm mitochondria that is important to be aware of. Poor sleep habits, lack of vegetables. Eat your vegetables. Your microbiome loves vegetables. Eat vegetables, lots of vegetables. A lack of movement, long-term stress. And stress is such a weird word these days. People go, oh, I'm stressed. And what they actually are is anxious. Or, oh, I'm stressed and they're irritated. Oh, are you irritated or are you stressed? Stress is a physiological response. It's not necessarily, it might carry an emotional response, but I think we have to start naming our emotional responses with more clarity and look at conditions that create stress and then shift the conditions as opposed to trying to get rid of the emotions we associate with stress. Alcohol, a lot of alcohol, antibiotics, very destructive because remember, mitochondria are bacterial ancestors. Herbicides, pesticides, they should just be taken right off the store shelves. Statins, heavy metals, anesthetics, this bisphonates are drugs that women are given for osteoporosis, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, of course, and silicone breast implants. And mitochondrial health is so important for um, uh, as a prevention for cancer. um, there's a lot of research coming out that the origin of cancer in the cell is a disruption of mitochondrial DNA and mitochondrial function. So it's really important to take care of these little bacterial ancestors. All our cells have. And if so, a woman has a mastectomy and then gets breast implants, you're actually putting something in her body for the rest of her life that disturbs the mitochondria. Like you got to think these things through a little bit better, I think. Um, and again, I don't see illness as having a singular cause. I often kind of struggle with this idea of a root cause. Most illness that and health challenges that I have seen is like a compilation of different events and it changes to the environment of the body. There's no like this, like breast implants are going to cause cancer. Not all women with implants obviously get cancer. Like that's a ridiculous statement, but it's one of the components that the body's going to struggle with for the rest of their life. And one can only struggle for so long until there's, you lose. So, yeah. Okay, so here's some flavonoid-rich plants. Again, all your vegetables, eat lots of vegetables, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, apples, oranges, lemons. Um, Rose hips, I use a lot of rose hips in teas for their flavonoid content. Hawthorn leaf and flower is another really high flavonoid content plant that I use a lot. And then Schizandra seems to be the one that really, really on a amazing level attends to the mitochondria in the body. Okay, so now let's get into more classic ideas about the microbiome. The mitochondria are often not classed as part of the microbiome because they're bacterial intelligence. I think of them as part of the microbiome. Okay, so the uterus, when I was in school, was considered a sterile environment. This is simply not true. And of course, like all the other microbiomes on this planet, whether within a body or outside of the body, on a maple tree or a yew tree, that microbiome is interfacing with the environment that that living being is existing in. So they're very fluid. So one of the challenges with mapping a microbiome is, you know, food, cultural differences, everything, like everything affects it. And it changes continuously. So the uterine microbiome. What's really interesting about the uterine microbiome is the research is actually coming out of fertility research. And what has been found is that women who have a healthy microbiome, healthy, again, we don't know exactly what a healthy microbiome, especially uterine healthy microbiome looks like. But lactobacillus is a big bacteria. It takes up a lot of space in the vagina, on the surface of the cervix, and in the uterus. And women with lactobacillus, particularly the crispatus, have much easier times becoming pregnant and with healthier pregnancies and then healthier newborns. So somehow lactobacillus is involved in our whole reproductive of the human race. And yogurt is a great source of lactobacillus, a good quality yogurt. I'm not talking about like a yogurt that's full of sugar, okay? Sugar is not or processed sugar, the white sugar, brown sugar, you know, dark brown sugar, whatever you want to call it, the corn syrup, all those sugars, they are not healthy for the microbiome. Complex sugars, like in vegetables, certainly are, though. So the uterine biome supports fertilization, supports implantation, supports the growth of the endometrium. And the endometrium is the outer lining of the uterus. And that is actually the part of the uterus that the egg implants into and begins to feed from. It's also, the endometrium is also what the tissue a woman sheds when she bleeds. Um, and it's involved in protection of life, the life-giving properties. The uterine biome protects the life-giving properties of the uterus. So I chose a little bit to talk about raspberry leaf. It's the classic uterine tonic. It's a great plant. I have seen it do so many wonderful things for women, like really ease menstrual cramps, slow down heavy bleeding, reduce clots, improve fertility, support pregnancy. You know, so many things I've seen raspberry leaf do. And we don't really know how raspberry leaf works. It's high in calcium, so maybe that has something to do with like relaxing smooth muscle tissue. It's high in tannins. Tannins have a whole relationship with the microbiome, and I'm going to get into that later. But we really don't know how this particular plant supports the health of the uterus. And I actually am wondering if it influences the microbiome of the uterus. I'd be interested if anyone has ideas about that, if they would like to share them with me. I'd be interested in that conversation. Okay, so just a little bit about how our understanding of of the health of the female reproductive tract is influenced by this new understanding of the microbiome in the uterus is a condition called endometriosis. And as a herbalist, there are so many ways plants support the health of a woman. Like I like to say, plants love women because of all the many ways plants support women, but there's also conditions that are difficult to work with plants, such as endometriosis and fibroids. You can help, you can support, you can ease, but to resolve these conditions is challenging. So, endometriosis is a condition where the endometrium, so the lining of the inner uterus, travels outside, probably through the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes, to um, the body. And, in this image, we see some of the endometrium and adenomyosis. So that's the muscular part of the uh, uterine lining on the surface of the uterus, the uterine tube, a little bit on the egg, a little bit on the fallopian tube. But I've also heard of endometrium tissue on hearts and lungs, and like it moves. The bowel, very common. And so then when these women either have go through ovulation or they're going to start bleeding, the pain is intense. They experience incredible pain. And one of the things about when a woman begins to bleed is that is an inflammatory process triggered by an immune response. So bleeding, what kills off the endometrial tissue so that it's shed, is an inflammatory response. Basically, it's an immune response. Now, if we're thinking, okay, so what they're thinking happens is the endometrial tissue leaves the uterus carrying with it some of the uterine biome, so bacteria that naturally lives in the uterus, and is suddenly finding itself in other places in the body. And remember how we spoke earlier about how bacteria lives in a particular environment. And when it leaves that environment, it becomes a problem. And that is what happens with endometriosis. What is the current idea is that the immune system is attacking the bacteria, triggering inflammatory responses, triggering the pain. It's attacking on the bits of endometrial tissue that's wandered outside of the uterus. And it's a bacterial problem. It's a problem with the microbiome. It's not necessarily a problem with the uterus. It's a biome imbalance. So for me, that totally rethinks how I approach a woman's health with a microbiome imbalance than with a hormonal imbalance. And also the other thing that's so interesting is the endometrial um, um, endro, endomy, gone. Endometriosis is, sorry, I'm having brain problems obviously today. I'm going to have to do something about the brain's microbiome soon. It has a relationship with the blood sugar imbalance, as does many challenges in a woman's reproductive health. And one of the things about the blood sugars is they're very influenced by the bacteria in the gut. So one of the ways you could approach endometriosis is using plants that are high in berberine, such as Oregon grape or celandine, greater celandine, California poppy, barberry, golden seal, gold thread. So what happens when berberine enters into the intestines is it helps produce this food called butyrate for bacteria. And it feeds healthy bacteria. And it also helps stimulate the growth of commensal bacteria that's involved in blood sugar balance. these commensal bacteria are involved in helping balance our blood sugars, and at the same time helping to eliminate some of the population of bacteria that we don't necessarily want a lot of, like E. coli in our colon. So it's just interesting, thinking about, for me, if endometriosis is a microbiome imbalance, and how is that affecting the endocrine system, and what herbs would we use to help reestablish a good balance in the microbiome. The brain is another environment that was considered sterile, and now we know it has a microbiome. So, again, this a lot of my understanding of how the brain and the microbiome work, which is, crude. My understanding is certainly crude, but is from working with people with chronic Lyme disease and using plants that specifically cross um, the blood-brain barrier and have known effects, abilities to rebalance the microbiome and resolve migraine headaches, resolve weird kind of electric shocks throughout the body, resolve numbness and tingling, um, resolve severe mood changes, resolve depression, resolve sleeplessness, just by using plants that have the ability to rebalance the microbiome of the brain. And here, again, they're looking at a number of conditions that are associated with changes in the brain, particularly in older people, um, and considering it a microbiome imbalance. So a couple of these plants, one would be thyme, and it's interesting when we look at these three plants, they all have a history, or a way that people have seen their medicine in the past as helping to clarify thoughts, helping to ease migraine headaches, helping to resolve confusion. Thyme was considered a plant for spirit attacks to the head. So if a spirit attacked your head, there might be confusion, there might be pain, a word loss. Maybe I should be using some time. And thyme. And thyme is a powerful microbiome balancer. And those terpenes and volatile oils, they cross the blood-brain barrier and they kind of go in and just clean things up. And we'll talk a little bit more about how these plants work in a bit. Rosemary for memory. Rosemary has a very similar volatile oil profile as thyme. And again, here's another plant that is thought of like, oh, it improves memory. It improves the health of the brain. And we often talk about rosemary as a circulatory stimulant for the brain. So it enhances blood flow through the brain. And I think if we were going to differentiate the two plants, thyme and rosemary, I would say thyme is more like a sharp little blade that you can do a little surgery on, whereas rosemary is more like an infusion of warmth into a cold environment. So if the brain is heavy and thick and foggy, rosemary is a great plant. So is thyme, but thyme's a little bit sharper. And then sage, it's even the name sage is even refers to the wise old one. And sage again is a powerful plant for rebalancing microbiomes, and it has a number of different constituents, but primarily again volatile oils. And here we are, these constituents cross the blood-brain barrier and will rebalance the microbiome in the brain. And once, a long time ago, I had a client and she had been in England, and she had dementia. Her daughter was taking her to a herbalist in England. And then they moved back to Canada and they looked me up and asked me if I could recreate the formula this woman had been taking. And since she'd been taking this formula, she'd gone off all her meds, she was sleeping, her behaviors, the sundowning and that happens with dementia, was resolved. She was in much better shape. She still had dementia, but her quality of life was much better. So I said, sure. And so for about 6 years, I gave this woman this tincture, and she was living in a long-term care facility, and she was on no other meds, not a single med. And her quality of life was excellent. And the nurses were really happy to give her this tincture twice a day. But the formula was basically rosemary, sage, and cinnamon, equal parts. And I was so happy to be able to support this woman's quality of life at the end of her life with plants. Yeah. So, and I think a lot of it is has to do with the microbiome. So obviously there's the brain gut connection. We've already looked at that a little bit with relationship between the bacteria in the gut in the infant that builds the brain. So again, there's all sorts of research showing that the biome in the gut is directly related to all these conditions that affect the nervous system. So what is that relationship? St. John's wort is one of my favorite all-time plants. It's extraordinary medicine. Um, I don't know another plant like it. And I can talk about serotonin and the bacteria in the gut that processes serotonin and the way the brain uses serotonin, and St. John's wort's relationship with serotonin. Um, that's very commonly known. One of the ways we could think about how St. John's wort helps to manage the gut microbiome and in therefore manage the microbiome of the brain is through its bitter taste. St. John's wort is a bitter, and bitter plants support the release of bile. And bile is our body's natural biome balancing fluid. So bile kills unwanted bacteria in the gut. It leaves behind commensal bacteria. So any plant you take, like St. John's wort, that has a bitter taste, is having some kind of influence on your microbiome in your gut and throughout your body, because it's all in relationship. Then we have like these plants like wood betony, and wood betony is such a great plant. I used gallons and gallons of this plant during COVID to just help people, stay kind of a little bit calmer. It grows so well in the garden, so you can grow it and then make lots of medicine and use it in so many different ways. But one of the things that herbalists say about this plant is it rebalances that intelligence line, or the intelligence between the brain and the gut. So wood betony is another plant you can use if you, for whatever reason, don't want to use St. John's wort. And there are reasons not to use St. John's wort. So this is just an idea, some ideas that they've been playing with. Now, this is with those poor germ-free mice. I don't know, they breed these mice and have them completely in these sterile environments. And then they're really super weird mice that do all sorts of unmice-like things. And so what they do is they put different kinds of bacteria into these mice and see what happens. And they find all sorts of different things happen when they put different types of bacteria in. So what's going on in our microbiome affects everything in our lives. So the good old stomach, it's also was considered a sterile environment because of the acids. They were like, how could anything live in that acidic environment? There's no way bacteria could live in that acidic environment. And having acid and like the acids in the stomach, is really important for breaking apart proteins, supporting the absorption of minerals further down in the GI tract. But they also, the acids kill unwanted bacteria that might be coming in on food or even breathing in, or viruses that we're breathing in or eating. It's, it is part of our immune system. But the stomach is not a sterile environment. And H. pylori is a bacteria that is found in 50% of the stomachs on this planet, human stomachs. This is a really interesting bacteria. It's a spirochete, so it's similar to Borrelia burgifolia. It's a very, very old bacteria. They suspect that its origin was in a cheetah. I have no idea why that is, but you develop you grow H. pylori in your stomach, and it is seeded from your family's dinner table. So as a child, if you have a family that is carrying H. pylori, you're going to carry the same strain as your family. And they can trace the H. pylori strains back to villages, ancestral villages. That's how old it is. It's been living in human stomachs for a long time, and it's not well understood. And like a lot of people are kind of trying to get rid of H. pylori because they feel like it's a pathogenic bacteria. When it's out of balance, it causes problems. There's no question. But when it's in balance, it's supportive of health. So let's look at a few H. pylori facts. So it's spiral, it's a spirojet, and it's over 3,000 years old. So it's been abiding in stomachs for over 3,000 years, probably. It's one of our, it's a pre-human ancestor. So they suspect, that H. pylori evolved with the human being from the time of chimpanzees. Chimpanzees have a lot of H. pylori in their guts. It was first discovered in a dog's stomach in 1893, and it was kind of dismissed because it was like, wow, there's no way that there's H. pylori in a human stomach. The environment is just too acidic. But like my old mutt eats everything, and her stomach acids must be just like boom, brutal, kick ass. So it's kind of weird thinking. Okay, where does H. pylori live in the stomach? It lives in the mucosa. So what the mucosa is the mucous membrane that covers all the lumens in your body. So, that soft, kind of wet feeling on the inside of your cheeks, that's a mucosa. Or, all down your respiratory tract, that's a mucosa. The lining of your vagina is a mucosa. Anywhere there's a tube that opens to the outer world, there's a mucosa, and the mucosa is a protective layer to protect the underlying tissues from the outside world, but it's also a place where a lot of bacteria live. So in the stomach, the mucosa is where the H. pylori lives. Okay, one of the things H. pylori does is it shifts the acid alkaline balance in the stomach. So it's traditionally found towards the lower part of the stomach, where it's going to empty, the contents of the stomach are going to empty into the small intestine, or and also up at the top of the stomach where the opening is to the esophagus. And in those places, the H. pylori has the power to start alkalizing the contents of the stomach. So when those contents pass out of the stomach, they don't burn the sensitive tissues on either side. So H. pylori, while often blamed for ulcerations, actually prevents ulcerations, particularly in the esophagus and in the small intestine. The other thing that's really interesting about H. pylori is it's involved in the endocrine system. It gets involved in the endocrine system, and it helps make hormones that tell us we're full. So people who don't have H. pylori present in their stomachs have a challenge knowing when they're full. And there's people without H. pylori tend towards obesity. So it just makes me think about that new drug, that controversial new drug that suppresses appetites, and then H. pylori kind of does that. Only it lets the human being know that their stomach is full, and then we're on this kind of battle against H. pylori. Anyways, it's just one of these things. H. pylori, like other bacteria, live in company with other, like they live in community. Bacteria, like life, all of life lives in community. And bacteria is no different. It likes to live in community. And sometimes one of the schools of thought around, like, well, why is H. pylori being found in other parts of the stomach? Like, why is there in some stomachs an overgrowth of H. pylori? Why is that? And a lot of people are speculating that it's missing some of its commensal bacteria. It's missing some of its friends that help keep it in check so that it doesn't overgrow. And we have no idea what those bacteria are. But one thing we do know is H. pylori is currently on the decline in stomachs. And in Japan, where there's high levels of gastric cancer or stomach cancer, they're trying to eradicate H. pylori from all stomachs. The thing with gastric cancer or stomach cancer, which is really interesting, is it first kind of came on the scene in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And that would be like the 1850s. That's when it first started. They started seeing an increase in stomach cancer. So again, I just go back to these ideas about the relationship between the microbiome and our body and the environment we're living in, because the Industrial Revolution is considered the birthplace of the Anthropocene, which is where we're currently living. And the Anthropocene is when human activity has profoundly influenced life on this planet, and mostly in a not so positive way. And that they say that the seeds of that was planted in the 18th century during the Industrial Revolution. So this idea of H. pylori and its relationship with gastric cancer or stomach cancer, I kind of wonder, is it more a symptom than a cause, or is it more complex? So how do we take care of the biome as a herbalist? Carrie Bone wrote a beautiful book um, called Functional Herbal Medicine, and he spends a lot of time talking about this in this book. So it's a little expensive, but it's worth it. So plant constituents in the microbiome. So a plant constituents is the medicine the plant is making. And these constituents have a long relationship with bacteria and viruses and fungi and yeast, and they weed, feed, and seed our microbiome. And they also help protect and repair tissues that might be damaged by a microbiome imbalance or what is commonly called an infection. So tannins are a constituent found in many, many plants, and tannins bind proteins. So the classic example would be, you're in the garden and you cut yourself and you have this little cut that's bleeding, and right next to you is just happens to be a blackberry plant. So you pick a few blackberry plant seeds, which are very high in tannins, chew them up, make a little spit poultice. So your saliva breaks up the cell membranes of the plant, releasing the plant's medicine, and you kind of put it over your cut, and your cut will stop bleeding. That's because the cut and a scab will form, and the scab is basically the knitting together of loose proteins. So where else do we see surface proteins? And that's on the surface of bacteria and viruses. They're covered in protein. And so the tannin molecule in plants, it binds the bacteria and viruses into clumps. This is very good because then it can't move. Remember, these organisms like to move around. And when they move around, they move into environments where they're not particularly in balance. So by clumping them together, they can't move around. And also, it makes it easier for macrophages, the big mouth white blood cells, to come along and just swallow that whole clump and take it out of action. So that's one of the roles of tannins in the body. And I want to point out that tannins, the bacteria, and the immune system have a relationship. It's not the tannins, it's not just the tannins, and it's not just the immune system. And it's also the structure of these microorganisms that create the medicine. Mucilage. So this is a constituent found in plants that are called demulcents or vulneraries if we're using them topically. And the mucilage is thick and gooey. It's complex sugars, and it kind of mimics. It's not as alive with so many different components as the mucus our body makes, but it does mimic it. And the mucilage will coat any disturbance in the lining of any lumen. So, for example, H. pylori, when the mucosa of the stomach is disturbed, starts burrowing into the underlying cells, the cells lining the stomach. And that's when the ulcers start. And that's when, the cancer can be seeded, is by the, the bacteria burrowing into the cells and causing damage. The bacteria has traveled to a place that it doesn't exist in a good way in the body. By replacing the mucosa with plants that are high in mucilage, like licorice, slippery elm, marshmallow, plantain, you're giving the H. pylori a place to live again where it doesn't cause damage. And it can do its good work as saying, hey, you had enough to eat, you're fine. Now go do the dishes. Yeah. So what you're doing with demulcents is recreating a healthy environment for the bacteria to live in. Flavonoids are all about repair for me. Again, that goes back to the mitochondria. And if the mitochondria is healthy, the repair is quick because the cells have the energy to do the repair work. Volatile oils and resins are definitely weeds. And yeah, they go in and they disrupt cell membranes and leak out the bacterial or viral DNA out into the tissues and make it easier for the immune system to identify. Because remember, way back when we were breastfed and that bacteria that was eating all our mom's breast milk was training the immune system to recognize self and others, that he was doing that with DNA. And so when volatile oils burn little holes in cell membranes and that DNA leaks out, that makes it easier for the immune system to find it and kill it, eliminate it, rebalance the microbiome. Saponin's another weeder, alkaloids, tricky constituents, but yeah, another weeder. And then sulfur, which is found in garlic. And garlic is the great plant for H. pylori, but also onions and horseradish. So these are all ways that different constituents support the health of the microbiome. And just remember that plants are really complex. Like there's a lot going on in every plant. And to just sort of isolate this one constituent and say this constituent is doing this, you kind of miss the whole nuance of herbal medicine because every plant is different and every plant has different medicine and effects on the body. But one of the great ways to start really understanding how a plant's medicine changes and develops is by growing your plants. or at least growing some of them, and watching how they grow and tasting them and smelling them and noticing what they're like when there's been a lot of rain, noticing how they change when there's a lot of sun and heat and dryness, noticing how plants that grow in the shade, how they are affected, and how growing the same plant in the sun will affect it. Notice how when if you pick the plant's medicine in the morning or you pick the plant in the afternoon, how that changes the medicine. I really think that that kind of close, intimate relationship with the plant to really learn about how it's making its medicine and how it's responding to its environment is key to understanding constituents, medicinal constituents, and key to understanding how to make good medicine. Okay, so I just want to do a little example of disturbed microbiome and hence disturbed tissues, and how plants can help resolve the imbalance in the microbiome and heal the tissues that have been disturbed by the biome imbalance. So this is a cartoon image. This is not what your small intestine looks like, but this is a cartoon image of your small intestine. And these are your gap junctions. And this is what these are the gap junctions that the bacteria B. infectatus helped develop as an infant. So as you can see, these cells are really well sealed. Nothing's getting through. And then these cells, for whatever reason, the mucosa would be up here on top of these cells. The mucosa has deteriorated, which has caused the bacteria to start seeking food, because bacteria eats, that's what life does, it eats, is seeking food in the actual cells of your body, where the mucosa, for the most part, is responsible for feeding bacteria. So the mucosa disappears, the food source disappears. They start seeking food in other places. They eat the gap junctions. They might penetrate cells. They eat the gap junctions. Suddenly there's spaces between the cells, and the bacteria starts moving. Some are moving into the bloodstream, and some from the bloodstream or the interstitial fluid or perhaps lymph are moving into the lumen. So this bacteria is moving into a space where it doesn't belong, and this bacteria is moving into a space where it doesn't belong. And when bacteria moves to an environment where it's not habituated with, doesn't have its friends living with them, doesn't have the right food source, it can become pathogenic. Okay, so bacteria isn't inherently pathogenic. So we need to do some repair here. So we're going to use plants that are high in mucilage, like slippery elm. We're going to put some slippery elm, and we're going to try to rebuild something of the mucosa to trap these bacteria and also to feed them in a good way. Okay, and give this tissue a chance to heal. We're going to use some plants that are high in flavonoids to, to feed whatever mitochondria is involved in this process, to tend to it, but also to catch the free radicals that are part of the inflammatory response or cell death. Like just catch it and tend to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are fueling all the repair. And then we might use a plant high in tannins to start binding these cells back together, to bind some of the loose bacteria together so that the immune system can come and grab it. And then we're going to also use some plants that are high in volatile oils or terpenes, and they're going to disrupt the cell membranes of the bacteria that's wandering around in places where it shouldn't be, and call the immune system to come and take care of that imbalance. So this is with some ways you would start to use plants to heal this kind of tissue, while at the same time providing a good environment for bacteria to live in the body, a healthy environment. So seeding is a big question because we don't actually even know what we're seeding. We don't know what our microbiomes are. So we don't really know what we're seeding. But I think for me, the best way to seed is with fermented foods. And there's so many different types of fermented foods. So if you don't like one kind, you can try another. Just keep trying them until you find the one that really speaks to your body, that makes you feel good, you know. I strongly recommend you check out Sandor Katz, the king of fermentation. He really inspired me with fermented foods. He has all sorts of free YouTube videos. He has some great books, lots of recipes, and knows everything you need to know about fermented food. And it's good to know about fermented foods because they're seeding the microbiome in your body. He has some pretty amazing healing stories about just putting these good bacteria into our body and what happens to our health. So feeding, there's lots of ways to feed bacteria with plants. So again, we're back to the mucilage-rich plants. So here's slippery elm. And these are, mucilage is basically complex polysaccharides that the bacteria can live on. They like them. And they're much more difficult to digest than the white sugar or the processed sugar or the corn syrup or whatever it is that's sweetening the food in processed food. And they're much more complex. So the bacteria has to work harder and it doesn't cause the same kind of blooming of bacteria as the white sugars or the processed sugars. Marshmallow, leaf, root, flower, all full of mucilage. Plantain's a really interesting plant. I use a lot of plantain to heal guts. I also use it to heal respiratory tracts when they've been damaged. High in mucilage, so that coating, high in tannins, so the ability to bind. And it has a constituent called allantoin in it. And allantoin's the same constituent in comfrey that's said to, quickly heal tissue. Plantain also carries some allantoin, and it's much milder. It's like a lower amount, so it's not as tricky to use as comfrey. And so here you have this tissue healing constituent as well. Calendula is another great tissue healer that also tends to the microbiome, again with the mucilage. Again, the flavonoids support the health of the mitochondria, and the volatile oils and resins will help eliminate some of the overgrowth. Inulin is another constituent plants make. It's a sugar. A lot of roots make inulin, and it's basically winter food for the roots. It's a complex sugar that the roots use to survive on over the winter. Some of the plants are elecampane, even named Inula helenium, articum, burdock root, and dandelion root, taraxacum off. Again, like harvest the roots in the spring and see what they taste like, and then harvest the roots in the fall and see what they taste like. If they're more bittersweet, they have a higher level of inulin. Inulin generally makes a root bittersweet as opposed to just bitter. And that sweetness is the complex sugar, inulin, which bacteria loves. For weeding, this is lemon balm. And again, it's like volatile oils, some tannins, flavonoids. Again, weeding and repairing. Yarrow is a great tissue healer. Achillea millefolium, the story. Achillea, the great warrior, carried it with him to heal wounds. So this is a great wound healer for outer wounds or inner wounds. So if there's a bacterial imbalance in one of the tubes or lumens in the body, yarrow's a great plant to take to help heal up any irritation in that lumen, and also help rebalance the microbiome. Meadowsweet, another plant traditionally used to heal the digestive tract, also very useful for the urinary tract. Again, places really high in the microbiome, really active microbiomes. And again, we've got the tannins, the flavonoids, and the volatile oils. So as you can see, all these plants come at the microbiome in different angles and different ways to help support the overall health of the body, which includes the microbiome. Oh, bile. Let's just talk about bile for a minute. So, yeah, so waste product of metabolism. Mm. Is bile a waste product, or is it something that the body, a substance the body makes from the processes or the stuff left over from metabolism for purpose? Because bile is really important to health. And so, most people know bile supports the absorption of fat and fat soluble vitamins, et cetera, fat metabolism. A lot of people know bile is like the body's natural laxative. When the bile is released from the gallbladder, it triggers peristalsis. So it gets everything moving. It gets the gut, the small intestine, the large intestine, everything moving kind of in harmony to create bowel movements or to empty stomachs or to, move things along. And we all know that, like, when the digestive tract gets stuck, it's painful, uncomfortable, so bile is brings that movement in. I always think of bile as associated with the wind element. And so that's another function of the bile. And also, you got to think about, like, uh, in the colon in particular, there's a massive amount of die-off of bacteria. And a lot of that die-off is just like sent right out in stool, where as if there's constipation, that stool is just sitting there. There's lots of research of reabsorption of hormones. You wonder if there's reabsorption of bits and pieces of dead bacteria. Um, but bile also plays a really important role in managing and regulating the microbiome of the gut. Like, it's our natural antibiotic, but it's very specific. It will leave behind commensal bacteria, not touch it at all. I talk about this a lot in the berberine video, um, in the Nuance of Herbal Medicine, a series. It leaves behind a lot of the, doesn't even touch the commensal bacteria, but will go after the bacteria that's in the wrong place. So when we're tending to the microbiome, we might use plants called chloretics. And these plants increase the release of bile from the liver. So dandelion's a classic chloritic. There's all sorts of them. Pretty much any bitter herb is a chloritic. The bitter taste triggers the liver to start making and releasing bile. And then you've got your qualagogues, and your qualagogues release the bile through the gallbladder. And this one is burdock. Burdock's a classic plant for supporting the health of the microbiome. It not only helps enhance the release of bile from the gallbladder, but it also carries high levels of inulin. So it's a prebiotic for the microbiome at the same time. So that's the microbiome for now. It's a lot of information, and I hope it wasn't delivered too quickly for you. There are notes, so check out the notes. And I welcome any comments or questions, and check out my other videos. So have a good day. Bye. If I can figure out how to stop this video.